A city-state faces an impossible equation. 9,000 citizens, 200,000 enslaved laborers surrounding them. Same language, same gods, same ancestors. The laborers remember when these lands belonged to their grandparents, before conquest, before subjugation. They grow the food. They know where weapons are stored. They outnumber the citizens 20 to 1. You cannot flee. Spartan law forbids citizens from living abroad. You cannot negotiate. The enslaved population, called helots, had tried rebellion before. In 464 BC, an earthquake devastated Sparta. The helots rose immediately. It took years to suppress them, so you have two choices: live in constant fear, or eliminate fear entirely. Sparta chose elimination. But that required something unprecedented. They couldn't simply train soldiers. Soldiers have breaking points. They needed something that wouldn't break. The solution was the Agoge, documented by multiple ancient historians who visited Sparta and recorded what they witnessed. Plutarch, writing in the 1st century AD, drew on earlier sources now lost to us. Xenophon, a contemporary of Sparta's height in the 4th century BC, described the system firsthand. These weren't legends. They were institutional procedures, refined over generations. Every year, Sparta formally declared war on the helots. This wasn't metaphorical. It was legal framework. Under this perpetual state of war, killing a helot at any time became a legitimate act of warfare rather than murder. Think about what that does to a society's psychology. You wake surrounded by people who could poison your food, who know your children's routines, who remember freedom. The declaration didn't make you safer. It made killing them legal. Birth in Sparta didn't guarantee life. Newborns were brought before the Gerousia, 28 men over 60 elected for life, plus the 2 kings. They examined the infant's body, searching for deformities, weakness, signs of future illness. Modern scholars debate what happened to rejected infants. Plutarch mentions the apotheti, a chasm where weak infants were supposedly discarded. Though he was writing 5 centuries after Sparta's peak and may have been repeating legend. But exposure was documented throughout the Greek world. An unwanted child, placed outside city limits. Death from elements, from animals, or perhaps taken by someone desperate enough to raise a child not their own. For those who passed inspection, early childhood lasted until age 7. Then the state took you, not metaphorically, physically. You left your mother's house, you entered the Agoge. You would not return to live with your family. Not at 10, not at 15, not at 25. The barracks were calculated discomfort. Boys slept on rushes reeds. They cut themselves from the Eurotas River. In winter they could add thistledown. 1 cloak per boy year-round. No shoes, regardless of season or terrain. The soles of their feet thickened with calluses. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. Spartan military doctrine depended on rapid movement over difficult ground. Shoes could be lost, feet could not. But the most precise element was food. Rations were deliberately insufficient. Plutarch describes the portions as calculated to keep boys hungry, forcing them to satisfy their needs through their own resourcefulness. Translation: you were expected to steal, not from outside Sparta. Spartan citizens didn't engage in trade, and boys didn't leave the training grounds. They stole from each other, from storage areas, from communal supplies. Here's the mechanism that made it work. Stealing wasn't punished. Getting caught was punished. If you stole successfully, you ate. You demonstrated the resourcefulness Sparta required. If you were caught, you were beaten publicly in front of your unit. Not because stealing was wrong, but because incompetence was unacceptable. This wasn't moral education. It was conditioning. The lesson wasn't, don't steal. The lesson was, don't fail. One account survives in multiple ancient sources. A boy stole a fox, possibly to eat it, possibly as a test of courage. He hid it under his cloak. During inspection, the fox began tearing into his stomach. The boy stood silent, expression neutral. He didn't cry out, didn't move, didn't reveal what was happening. By the time inspection ended, the fox had caused fatal injuries. He died shortly after. Modern readers hear this and think it's insane, suicidal. But that was the point. The value system was explicit. Death was preferable to revealing weakness. Pain was preferable to failure. Physical destruction was preferable to social disgrace. This story was celebrated for centuries. It represented the ideal, the perfect student. Boys were organized into units called agil or herds. Each had a leader, the iron, usually around 20 years old. He held absolute authority over younger boys. He could order punishments. He participated in beatings. His word was law. But he was also being evaluated. How he managed the boys determined his own advancement. The system was self-enforcing. The victim became the enforcer. The enforcer knew his willingness to enforce was being judged. There were no private spaces, no solitude, no opportunity to develop identity separate from group surveillance. Ages 7 through 20, the years when humans develop their sense of self, their values, their understanding of relationships. Instead, there was only the group, only the hierarchy, only the state. Emotional attachment to family was systematically suppressed. Boys didn't return home, families didn't visit barracks. The famous Spartan mother's instruction to her son, "Come back with your shield or on it," wasn't encouragement. It was a threat. Return victorious or return dead. Do not return defeated. Do not return if you fled. If you came back alive and beaten, you were not welcome. And that message came from his mother. The Agoge didn't just train boys. It trained the entire society to reinforce the same values. Physical training was constant. Wrestling, running, combat drills. But ancient sources emphasize the physical component was secondary. Plutarch states the Agoge was designed to produce obedience, endurance, and victory in battle, in that order. Obedience was listed first deliberately. The most severe test was the diamastagosis, the whipping ordeal at the altar of Artemis Orthia. Boys were whipped in front of spectators, not as punishment but as demonstration. The goal was enduring without crying out, without showing pain, for as long as possible. Some died during the ritual. In later periods, this became a spectacle that attracted Roman tourists. By then, Sparta was a shadow of its former power, the Agoge performance. But during Sparta's height, this wasn't entertainment, it was conditioning. You will suffer, you will not react. Your body is not yours. Around age 18 or 19, a selection occurred. The most capable, most loyal, most thoroughly conditioned were chosen for the Cryptia, the secret service. Thucydides mentions it. Plato references it. Plutarch describes it in detail. Aristotle calls it disturbing. Selected youths were sent alone into Helot territories with a knife or short sword. No armor, no supplies. By day they hid. By night they moved. Their targets were Helots, specifically those identified as strong, capable, or potentially defiant, those who might lead rebellion. The youths killed them quietly in the dark, without trial, without warning, then returned to hiding. This continued for weeks, possibly months. Scholars debate the frequency and scale. Some argue it was regular practice. Others suggest it activated only during periods of tension. But sources agree on one point: it happened. The purpose wasn't military. Helots were unarmed, not enemy soldiers. The purpose was psychological. Consider what this does to an 18-year-old, 11 years learning that obedience is survival, that suffering is normal, that individual identity is irrelevant. Now you're told to kill someone who hasn't attacked you, someone unarmed, someone enslaved by your own state. Kill them in secret. Don't hesitate. Don't question. If you hesitate, you failed. If you question, you're not fully loyal. This was the final test, the final severing of shared humanity. Those who returned without hesitation, without trauma, without doubt became full citizens. The Cryptia was a filter, separating those who still had limits from those who didn't. At 20, you became a full-time soldier, but you didn't become independent. You lived in barracks, ate in communal messes called systems. Every meal was supervised, ritualized. The food was deliberately unpleasant. The notorious black broth was famous even in ancient times. One foreign visitor reportedly said after tasting it, "Now I understand why Spartans are so willing to die." Marriage was technically allowed, but Spartan men didn't live with their wives. They visited at night, briefly, then returned before dawn. Children were born, but fathers didn't raise them. The state did. At 30, after 23 years in the system, a man achieved full citizenship. He could vote, but he still lived in barracks, still ate in messes, still trained daily. This continued until age 60. From 7 to 60, 53 years of institutionalized living, of surveillance, of ritualized behavior. The result was exactly what Sparta needed. At Thermopylae in 480 BC, 300 Spartans and their allies held a mountain pass against a massive Persian army for 3 days. They died in formation. At Plataea in 479 BC, Spartan infantry held their line while allied Greek forces around them collapsed, turning near defeat into crushing victory. For nearly 2 centuries, Sparta dominated Greek warfare. Not because their soldiers were stronger, but because disgrace was worse than death. But systems optimized for one thing fail at everything else. Sparta's citizen population declined steadily. Not every boy survived the Agoge. Disease, accidents, the brutality itself, and citizenship requirements were rigid. You had to complete the Agoge, contribute to a mess, own land worked by lots. As land concentrated among fewer families, fewer men qualified. War casualties removed citizens permanently. Sparta had no reserves, no broader population to draw from. By 371 BC, when Sparta faced Thebes at the Battle of Leuctra, their army was smaller than a century earlier. They lost decisively. The Theban general Epaminondas used an innovative weighted formation that crushed the Spartan right. In one afternoon, Sparta lost approximately 400 citizens from a total population, perhaps numbering only 1,500 full citizens, more than a quarter of their entire citizenship, dead. In one battle, there were no replacements. The machine that produced perfect soldiers had no mechanism for recovery. You couldn't recruit foreigners. They weren't Spartan. You couldn't shorten training that would compromise the product. You couldn't expand citizenship criteria that would dilute standards. Within decades, Sparta became a secondary power. By the Roman period, it was a tourist attraction. Visitors came to watch whipping rituals, to see remnants of a society that once terrified the Greek world. Sparta's lesson isn't that brutality works. Many ancient societies were brutal. The lesson is about precision. The Agoge was social engineering, systematic and calculated. designed to eliminate every variable that might produce disobedience. It worked exactly as intended. It produced warriors who couldn't be broken, and a society that couldn't survive. Perfection in one dimension creates catastrophic fragility in all others. What remains is documentation, procedures for dismantling human beings and rebuilding them as something that doesn't question, doesn't hesitate, doesn't break, until the system itself breaks. And when it does, there's nothing left.